Hi, welcome at this Startup Talk with Sid Sijbrandij, UT-alumnus and CEO of the billion-dollar company GitLab. Today, he will share his startup story and he will give advice to you as an entrepreneur. Watch the Startup Talk now.
I read a lot of interviews and articles about you. They are written in between. Entrepreneurship in Twente is, we call this university the Entrepreneurial University. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, for sure. I think one time I even got like a loan or something like that from the university to start a business.
Wow.
And I participated in a group called the FOS, Verenigde Ondernemende Studenten, kind of the student-run entrepreneurial activities. So lots of peers at the university and very much supported by the university. So that was great.
Okay. And the student life, can you have a good student life in Twente?
I think so. I think when I was in the FOS, I recognized that I was the only one that wasn't in the Audentis fraternity. So I'm like, okay, apparently I'm missing out, so I should join. So I think in my 4th year at Twente, I joined that, and that was a good call.
Okay, so somewhere in, what was it, 2003, you graduated in Twente. But before that, as a kid, what was your dream job?
I'm not sure. I graduated high school being really good at physics, and I like kind of physics problems. Like I just finished the book What If by Randall, the author of XKCD, and I love that kind of stuff. I was constantly holding debates in my head, like two people arguing a side of the same problem, and then trying to kind of have the best debate possible. So not sure. I don't think debating gets you very far in life. It's a skill I have to suppress. But I always liked technology and tech startups. So I was always reading TechCrunch and blogs like that. So it was great to end up in tech.
You were in U-boat business. What is that? How did you came there?
Actually, maybe it's even interesting to start at what I ran a company while at university. I sold infrared receivers. So that's what I did during when applied physics got a bit too tough. But yeah, after university, I did I started a company that sells submarines, recreational submarines. There was an inventor and an investor, but there wasn't a company yet. So I helped incorporating the company and hiring what eventually became the general director, a friend of mine from applied physics. And the idea was that it seemed super cool to make submarines.
And it was in Twente?
No, it's, well, first of all, I had to negotiate my compensation. I asked for something completely reasonable. And the investor offered me half of that because he was still working with numbers that were valid when he was still in business, but by that time they were 15 years old. So I lived on my own during my studies, but now I had so little money, I had to move in back with my parents. So it started in the attic above my parents' house, trying to make this happen. And then at some point we moved to Thailand because it would be lower cost to manufacture it there. And then we moved to Breda because in Thailand we learned it would be really good to be close to the investor. And the company still exists. It's U-Boat Works in Breda, and they make the most submarines in the world.
Wow, amazing! You were in such a boat. It must be exciting.
It was exciting, but yeah, the building is the interesting part, and it was a big challenge. We try to make it super affordable, but we failed by 2 orders of magnitude. We try to make it for $20,000, and they're now $2 million. So we kind of failed on that mission, but luckily the market was still big enough.
I see. And then you did something completely different. You went to the Ministry of Justice as a lead architect, right?
Yeah, something came on my way where there was a position in the Rijksoverheid, and it was an innovative project, and I thought that would be interesting. So I was a civil servant part-time, and I must say it was really interesting. Was really.
But it sounds totally non-entrepreneurial to me to go to such a state organization.
Yeah, there's a big contrast. I think the project itself was very entrepreneurial. We had budget and we were allowed to try new things, so that was super helpful. Of course, all the processes are not geared towards fast execution, but it was a good. I think that the people were super talented there, so it was kind of fun to be in that environment and to work with those people. And it was part-time and temporarily, and that helped to deal with it. And the whatever the environment is, you still try to get as much done as you can despite the circumstances.
Okay. But then on some moment you decided to start a company together with someone you know, to call it the GitLab. How was it started? What was the core idea and the core moment that you said, this is what we're going to do?
Yeah, so I did start a company with someone I knew from the University of Twente. It's called App Appeal. It was before GitLab. GitLab I started without anyone. And I started it because one day I was reading Hacker News, a website for developers and programmers. And I saw GitLab having an article on there, and thought, oh, this makes a ton of sense. All the software I use is open source, except for the collaboration software. And I always found that a bit ironic. And so when I saw software that was open source, you could contribute back to it, I thought that makes a ton of sense. So I thought there must be people that want to use this as a service. At that point, GitLab, you had to download it. So I wrote something up where you could use GitLab.com as a service and place a waiting list, and 300 people ended up signing up to that. So it was kind of the first indication that there was a market there. I posted it and it didn't trend. So I went downstairs, was baking pancakes. And then at some point I checked again and it was trending. It was on the homepage, and my wife ended up finishing those pancakes because I was upstairs for hours trying to answer all the questions and suggestions that came up. And I sent an email to the author of GitLab, Dimitri, like, hey, I'm starting this GitLab.com thing, not including you. Hope you don't mind. I got a very nice response back, like, totally cool. Thanks for making the project more popular. So that was quite kind of inclusive thinking from Dimitri. And then a year later, I found out that it was very hard to make money with GitLab.com, but there were all these companies running GitLab themselves internally. And they were reaching out like, hey, can you help? Can you help? And at the same time, Dimitri sent out a tweet to the world. I want to work on GitLab full time. Just like, hey, this is what I want. He was employed at the time. And so I emailed again, like, hey, I'm that guy from last year. I'd like to hire you so you can work on GitLab full time. And we made a deal. And then I had to get his first monthly wage to him. So I went to the local Western Union office, said I wanted to make a wire to the Ukraine. And they said, oh, the Ukraine. Yeah. Do you know that person, or is it someone you met over the internet? Because there were lots of scams going on at the time. And I made the wire and we were in business together.
Cool. You talked about your wife, because in an interview I read that you said to your wife on some moment in the early days, if I would ever bring up external finance, you should smack me in the face. So you don't want to be external financed. And I read that in November you go public. What happened in between?
Yeah, we're not going public in November, by the way, but there's a big step between kind of bootstrapping a company and paying for it yourself and attracting outside funds. If you get investor money in the company, from that point on, your odds of success are much lower, but the potential outcome is much bigger. But since you only have a few kind of shots in a goal in your life, you probably want to optimize for the odds of success. Before we went to the US and joined by Combinator, I said, look, stop me if I want to raise external funding, because it's going to make everything way more risky. The problem was we were in the US and we tried to convince people to join our company and as executives, and they said, okay, well, how many shares will I get? Oh, nothing. We'll just pay you a salary. And like nobody was interested. So we realized we had to give out shares and then or options. And then if you do that, then people expect that to be worth something. If 7, 8, 9 years, they want to be able to sell. So you have to get to some kind of a liquidity event. So you have to go public. And in order to grow so fast, you need more money. So you have to raise money. So we kind of, we realized, okay, there's a reason that everyone is taking money. Otherwise, you're not going to build the best company because you're not going to get the best people. So that's what we figured out during Y Combinator. And that's why, luckily, there was no household violence when I ended up raising money.
Okay. And Y Combinator, you're talking very positive about him also in publications. That is the incubator that made you grow, right? How important is an incubator in your opinion?
It depends, but I think if you're technical founders, especially from outside the US, but even from inside the US, I think it's super important. I think it's super worthwhile to go through Y Combinator. It dilutes you by 7%, but I think you get a great peer group, you get great mentors, and you're able to raise at a much higher valuation afterwards. So I think it's totally worth it.
Nice. Yeah, here in University of Twente, in the Bastille, we have our own incubators recently. It's very new. Due to Corona, it was not opened much time. What do you have some tips for us as an incubator to implement? What would you expect if, with your experience from an incubator like us?
I think that what's super interesting is that Y Combinator doesn't offer shared housing to the startups. I'm not sure if your incubator does, but a lot of incubators focus on that. And it has a couple of downsides. You get the companies to mingle and the cultures to mingle, while the successful startup tends to be the exception. So you don't want to kind of have an average culture across all the startups. You want to keep them away from each other. And also it reduces the focus on adding value by getting great speakers in and things like that. So my suggestion would be not to provide offices to companies.
Okay, well, Corona fixed that more or less to us, so we have no choice. And also on some moment you said what makes GitLab big is openness, transparency, and the Twents entrepreneurship. What is Twents entrepreneurship in your opinion? Or what did you mean with it?
I think there's in Twente there's a lack of good marketing, but we make it up in execution. And I think the much more successful startups like Thuisbezorgd are a good example of that, where it's just get a system running early, execute well. Execution is actually behind you. So I think the focus on execution is a hallmark of Twente's entrepreneurship.
Nice to hear that. And we have some nice examples beside of Thuisbezorgd, like Booking, but also Code Sandbox. Do you know the guys of Code Sandbox? I just talked to them about you, that we have this meeting in there in the session.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I worked with the the CEO.
Cool. You have a very open and transparent company, but no, you're over 1,000 employees. Your valuation is billions in between. You're a unicorn, but no headquarters. Is that right?
That's correct.
And how can it be?
So we've never had a headquarters, we had a headquarters, but nobody showed up, so we stopped doing that, and we're registered at a post office box, and everyone works from home or from an office if they want to, but we don't have this building in which we all congregate, and I feel by now everyone is kind of used to that with Corona. I think the special thing was that we were the largest all remote company even before the pandemic happened.
Yeah, and you didn't organize this due to Corona. It was long before, right? That you worked this way.
Yeah, it's been 2015. We discovered that people weren't really excited about coming to the office. We were working remote anyway. We already had people in many countries, and we just said, okay, we're just going to be an all remote company. We don't need an office to come together. We'll make sure that we'll have informal communication, but organize it remote.
Okay. Well, what are the pros, the positive sides of that, and maybe also the downside?
Yeah, I think it's much easier to have one way of working. So I think what's really hard to run a hybrid company where some people are at the office and some people are not at the office. You get kind of two ways of working. You get an A team and a B team. That people at the office tend to be better informed. We have the great thing for us is that everyone is on the same level, and we can focus on making that work really well. For example, we spend a lot of time on organizing informal communication, which is something that doesn't naturally happen if you're all remote. But if you take time and effort, you can organize that. I think if you have both people at the office and people remote, then it's very natural to kind of not take the time to do that.
Okay, nice. Working online, you need all kinds of tools, and I read that you use Google Docs and Zoom and Slack, that kind of tooling, which my favorites as well. But I get a lot of comments that it is American, there's privacy, CIA is sniffing the data, that kind of things. How do you look at it?
I think it's very empowering if people are able to run their own software. And we're proud at GitLab. You can run it on gitlab.com, but if you want to run it yourself, you can just download it and run it yourself. And there's tens of thousands of European companies that do that.
No, but what I also mean is that inside your company as a tool to run your business, like Google Docs and Zoom. We have now a Zoom meeting, but I know in Europe there are a lot of companies and organizations don't want to use Google Docs or Zoom because they think it's a privacy issue. Doesn't that count for you?
I think, yeah, there's nuance there. I think it's a big subject. We do use those tools, and right now I don't think it would be a step down from the tools you mentioned to the self-managed alternatives. One thing we're trying to do is make GitLab better. I'm looking forward to having real-time editing of issue and merge request descriptions in GitLab, and that would allow us to do even more in GitLab.
Okay, nice. Recently, I'm not sure how long ago it was, there was a problem with data loss. Every company had problems, so you also, but you were very transparent on it and very open in communication. How important is it, in your opinion, to be transparent as a company, and why?
Yeah, and I think it's super important to be transparent. It's not easy. I think, like, if we would have treated that incident like any other company, you wouldn't have heard about it. So the problem is it gets more widespread. Even though it was a minimal problem and there was almost no data loss, it still comes up like years later. So that's the downside of transparency. The upside is that with the people that a lot of people like that they're getting more insight, and it builds trust. Like, hey, if they're transparent about this, I know that there's no other problems lurking behind the surface.
Okay. I'm surrounded here with other startups and also in the Zoom meeting. So I invite everyone to come up with questions if you have them to Sid, because it's a unique opportunity. But do you have some tips for startups if they have an idea and they think about starting a business? What to do?
There's enough. There's already a lot of tips out there. I think what's really interesting, if you join Y Combinator and you haven't launched your product yet, within the first week, they'll ask you to launch your product. And there's always a lot of startups that have all kinds of reasons why you can't launch that week, but they won't take no for an answer. So I think the most important thing is just get it out there, start getting feedback from customers.
That's a nice one. We here in our incubator, we do also a start program. We give master classes and lectures, and we teach how to make a good pitch, how to make a good business plan. Did you do these things? Follow all kinds of lectures and make a business plan, or how did you do it?
I think I wrote my business plan or two while doing TBK or management science, but I didn't write one for GitLab as far as I remember.
Okay, so it can be done without it.
I think so too. Yeah, I think the most important part of a company is that you have a product that people like, and that there's more common they say make something people want. I think if you have the idea, it's something people want. I think that's enough to dive in, and then you got to be sure that you get there's some margin in it, that you can charge more than it costs you. I think if you have those in place, you can go for the rest. But it doesn't hurt to plan, and we're working on our strategic 3-year plan right now. So I'm not against it.
Okay, nice. Maybe time for questions.
Yep.
You mentioned that external finance always increases the risk, in your opinion, for a startup. What is it about having investors or having money coming in that makes you think that it's more risky for your success rate?
Yeah, so typically when you raise investment, they expect like a T2, D3, so triple the company 2 years in a row and then double it 3 years in a row. That's a very high speed, and you're more likely to end up on the side of the road if you're going at that speed. Like, you have less time to solve any problems that come up. If you're growing at a slower pace, then it gives you more time to correct things if you don't get the traction you expected, etc.
Okay, thanks for the question and the answer. Another question.
Hi. Well, I use GitLab for my company, and the first time I used GitLab was actually for a confidential project for the municipality of Rotterdam. And when we were using, I actually asked the manager, "How do you trust this? Actually, how can we are coding something confidential and use this and use GitLab?" And I know that a lot of companies use it and have a lot of powerful things there. How do you convince people that they can trust in your products, actually? I know about transparency, but I guess it's not just that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for using GitLab. I think what really helps is that all of our code is source available. So GitLab is open core. Some part of it is open source, some part is proprietary, but all the code is open to inspection. So there's a much higher confidence that we haven't installed any backdoors in the software. And apart from like intentional, that's kind of the intentional side of like, you can run it yourself, you can inspect the code. And the third thing is, how do you make sure it's secure? So we have a bug bounty program where we pay people if they find vulnerabilities. So you can be assured that there's lots of people looking for vulnerabilities in GitLab all the time. And that's why GitLab is now used around the world, including at like the intelligence community and things like that, where people know it's secure, people know it's visible, and it's trustworthy to store their ideas because they can control it themselves.
A question from the chat from Joel Tayar. Joel is one of the early startups here in the program. Hi, Joel. How did you start getting GitLab to the public, to the first customers? How did the minimal viable product look like?
Yeah, so Dimitri already did that. By the time I saw it, which was a year in, already 300 people had contributed to the project and thousands of organizations started running it. I contributed by making sure the documentation and the installation got better. So making it easier to install and maintain. I think that was a big enabler.
Okay, nice. And Jelme Hendricks is asking, we saw that GitLab uses compensation calculator to keep salaries transparent and fair in remote working environment. Do you think a similar compensation plan would be valuable for other companies as well? Yeah,
so we're transparent about like the salary bands we have at GitLab. You can see them on our website. You can see them on our job on our job listings, and they're based on like what is the role, what is your level within the role, and where in the world are you located. And I think it's great if companies give more visibility there. I think it makes it easier for applicants to know what to expect, and it keeps everyone honest. You're less likely to underpay people. It's not a remediation by itself, but you're less likely to underpay people that way. And the last question I talked about, the docs and the installation process, I also kind of hang around on Hacker News a lot, kind of promoting GitLab to people. So considering this is the University of Twente, that is probably the area people are most likely to underinvest. So market your product, become synonymous with the brand. At some point I had parody accounts that their parody Twitter account was called GitLab CEO here, because I was in so many Hacker News posts that people kind of got tired of me. But I think that I might have overdone it a little bit, but I think it's super important to kind of try to spread the word about your product. Okay, that's a good one. Christian is asking a question, of course. You said that when you raise funds, the odds of success are lower compared to when you haven't. That sounds paradoxical. Why is that the case? Yeah, so why do it if the odds of success go down? Because the outcome goes up. So probably you're going to make more money if you raise funds. However, it's more of a binary distribution. Like the odds of a zero greatly increase. So it's like doubling down on red 4 times in a row. Like you're going to end up with a lot of money if that works, but the odds of that are smaller. It's not that extreme, but I think for companies that raise an A round, making it all the way to IPO, I think it's like 3% or something like that. So the odds aren't in your favor. Okay. Any questions here before I go deeper into the chat, please? It's nice to have both a live audience and an online audience.
Yeah, so I'm here on the camera. Just to understand the bigger picture. So when did you start GitLab? When did you make your first hire? And at what size are you now? So how many employees do you currently have? And about that.
Yeah, thanks for that. So 2011, Dimitri started GitLab. 2012, I made it a company. 2013, I hired Dimitri. 2014, we incorporated. 2015, we joined Y Combinator. We were 9 people at the time. And today we are 1,300 people in over 60 countries.
So that means that nearly in all the time zones, you have people working in the company at some moment.
Yeah, we're still missing the time zones that have offsets by half an hour. That'd be fun, because right now we can still say top of the hour or bottom of the hour. But yeah, there's people around the world, which is really convenient for things like support and infrastructure. Because people don't have to disrupt their sleep cycle as much.
Okay. The corona crisis came early this year. The last time I traveled was to Las Vegas to the CES. After that, it was more or less blocked. What did it to your company?
Yeah. First of all, like, while we didn't have to kind of change too much, like we never had a headquarter, some people could rent offices to do their job, so they could no longer go to that shared office space. So we allow people to go to a WeWork or something like that, not to hang out with fellow GitLabbers, but if they don't want, if their house is not a convenient place for them. But the bigger thing was a lot of team members had their kids at home because the schools were closed. So that was a really big burden on them. And of course, many people were fearing for their health and the health of their loved ones. We also saw our customers impacted. So we saw a lot of customers some of whose businesses just evaporated. So they didn't have the money. We had a major airline that was considering purchasing GitLab in a big way. And almost all of them ended up purchasing GitLab because it's the way for them to digitally transform, to get from idea to result faster. But the deals became fewer people, lower tiers, just because they had to save money. So I think all in all, compared to many other companies, we had a much easier time, but we even saw productivity go up across the company, maybe because people were bored a little bit, but we thought it would be a good idea to send the signal, hey, it's okay, we're in a pandemic. It's still okay to take a vacation, even though you're not going anywhere. We also had a few Fridays where we said, this is Friends and Family Day. We're going to treat this as a holiday and give everyone an extended weekend.
Nice. Tabia Brandt is asking, what are your thoughts on being a born global company? How do you go about selecting markets, finding customers, and generally growing? How do you think about it?
I think for us, it was surprising how much easier it was to do business in the US. I think companies seem to be more supportive of startups, like have an easier time purchasing from a startup. And in our space, the DevOps space, it seems like a couple of years ahead of Europe. While we have higher usage in Europe, the majority of our revenue is coming from the US. So I think it was very fortunate for us that we went to the US to build the company. I think otherwise we would have had a hard time competing with US-based companies.
Nice. Do you consider yourself a US-based company, a US company? Or what are you officially? Because you are everywhere. Yeah.
So at some point we had to, like, we had that discussion internally, and we said we're a San Francisco-based startup. So okay. if we'd rather be just diversity, inclusion, and belonging is one of our values. So like we try to accommodate everyone, but in case we have to pick, we'll act like a Silicon Valley startup.
Yeah, well, which is not that. Erg van der Hulst, the real Dutch name. Do you consider the open source philosophy for GitLab to be one of the most important reasons for its success, or are there other factors you think were most significant?
Yeah, I think it's one of the two turbos, we call them. One of them is we are a single application. We bring all your development and operations and security activities in a single pane of glass. That is super helpful. The other one is the open source part. Every month, we get over 250 contributions, improvements made by the wider community. And we think that's a big benefit to the users of GitLab.
Yes. Interesting question from Harms. I think it's Rainer. How can European IT startups compete if they use stock options to a much lesser extent?
Yeah, I think it's super hard to compete if you don't have executives in the Valley. All the people with, like, we found it very hard to recruit outside the Valley for people with experience in sales, in marketing, and engineering. So I think that's tough. And what's also interesting, not directly related to the question, is that people outside the US value stock options to a much lesser extent because they have very few friends who got rich with stock options. So they treat it more like funny money. So you still have the same dilution, but it's not appreciated as much.
Karim is asking, for a research company switching to an open source strategy, what would your unique advice be that I can't easily find online for setting up such our strategy? So Karim is asking some advice.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of advice online. So I think it's more like, where can I find the best advice online? So already talked about just start shipping it. I think pricing is always hard. So I got a lot of ideas. If you Google GitLab CEO pricing, you'll find a lot of ideas around what good pricing looks like, which is another thing you probably want to pay attention to.
Then Maaike, I look around sometimes to see if questions are coming from this side. Maaike Doctor, you mentioned spending time on informal communication is important for full remote companies. Can you elaborate a bit on how you execute or stimulate the informal communication in your company amongst colleagues?
Yeah, for sure. We have over 15 ways in which we do that. You can find them by Googling GitLab informal communication with a lot of contacts. But an example is coffee breaks. So we make people explicitly take 10 coffee chats when they join GitLab and encourage them to do one every week where they meet another person in the company and just chat for 25 minutes. So instead of like having a chat around the water cooler, it's on your calendar, it's on Zoom, but there's no pressure to achieve anything. There's a lot more, all the way from juice box chats to DJ Zoom rooms. But I think what's important in a remote company is that you give people permission to not be efficient. Like meetings are super efficient. People have the feeling like as soon as they're on Zoom that they have to get something done. And while that is the case in most meetings, it's good to explicitly create get-togethers where that isn't the case.
Interesting, yeah. I can imagine that there are people in your company who never met a colleague. Is that true?
Yeah, so we have, in real life, like, and it's, first of all, it's surprising how good you get to know people without seeing them in person. When we get together as a company, the most surprising thing is the length of people. That's really hard to estimate behind a computer. But yeah, we had people who worked at GitLab for, I think one was 7 months. He was in Argentina, and the first team member was, I think, Douwe visited her on his 6-month tour visiting 3 team members. So yeah, already working for a very long time.
Okay, so that's what's happening also, that there are tours to visit people in all these countries.
Yeah, so right now there isn't because of Corona, but we have a travel stipend. So as you visit a fellow team member, spend some time with them, we'll pay for part of the travel cost. So the person in Hawaii is getting a remarkable number of visitors.
I can imagine, yes. Jair is asking, sitting your business model, pricing, you create value before you take value. Is that right? In my opinion, a large community is key for such a model. What's the secret to building and retaining a community?
Yeah, I think if you're going to go with an open core model, it's you'll have to you're going to get a smaller part of the value pie than you would get in a totally proprietary model. So with open core, you're going to get massive distribution. Distribution is much easier, but you're going to capture less of the value as a company. So what you need to do is you make sure that you go after a really big market. You get a lot of people, like there's 30 million estimated registered GitLab users. And then you can still build a very good business, even though you capture a smaller part of the value.
Then we go to Tabea again. I hope I pronounce her name good, but still the question is, what are learnings on creating understanding in such a multicultural company? Learnings on creating understanding.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects to this. I think our value of diversity, inclusion, and belonging helps with that. Also, I think that there's cultural differences, and one of the big ones is linguistics. Like, people in the US will be much more subtle about indicating their preference for something, but they have to kind of dial it a bit up in order to make sure that they're understood around the world. And likewise, the Dutch people have to dial it a little bit down, because otherwise they come across different than they might want to.
Okay, nice. Joe Laufer is asking a question. In the post-COVID-19 world, do you see many companies continuing to employ people remotely from their homes? Interesting.
Yeah. First of all, like, we're all remote. We're not necessarily work from home. Like, we'll pay for an office space if you need it. It's just that we don't bring everyone together in the same office. You'll be the only person at that office. And I think a lot of companies right now are like, remote is working well, but everyone feels very lonely because they have not organized informal communication. And everyone is longing to go back to the office in order to have that informal time again. But at the same time, people are moving, people are leaving the big cities. So a lot of companies end up being like hybrid by accident. And I think that's going to work out really badly. So I'd encourage companies to be very intentional about it. Like, it's totally cool to say we're a co-located company, and after the pandemic, we're all going to be at the office again. I think that's very valid. I also think it's very valid to say we're going to be all remote. If you're going to do the hybrid thing, you have a big chance of creating the A and the B team. And I think that's going to be a very bad experience for the remote people. And your best remote people will join an all remote startup so that they're on the same page as everyone else. So, and also this pandemic is going to last at least months longer, maybe even longer. So let's start organizing that informal communication. If people say they miss the office, they don't mean they miss the commute. They don't miss the furniture. They miss that informal hanging out with other people.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I totally agree. DTA, whoever it is, DTA, nice question. In the context of product development, how does GitLab deal with competition, especially companies doing comparable things? Daniel. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, I think so. GitLab covers more of the DevOps lifecycle than any other company. It's a broader in scope, it has more depth, and it's advancing at a more rapid pace. We do compare ourselves to the competition. If you Google GitLab maturity, you'll find of every part of our product, like how advanced it is. And if you Google GitLab DevOps landscape, you'll find all our competition, and you can click any icon and see how we think GitLab compares against that. While we do like give people that information, I think most of our development efforts are just do what's right for the customer and not particularly like do what everyone else is doing.
Okay, nice. A question about the future from Incubators. I think it's Rens asking. Hi, Rens. What will be the future of GitLab? How do you see the future?
Yeah, we still have a long way to go before every single part of GitLab is best in class. So we're striving to get there. We think it's a massive market opportunity. It's a $15 billion market. So we'll keep making sure the product gets better over time and making sure that we do a good job of getting it into people's hands.
Are there any technologies currently, because you work now on GitLab, became very big, Is there anything in development that you think, that might be a next challenge for me to pick it up?
Yeah, I think if you would Google GitLab moonshots, you'll find a few ideas we're talking about. I think that data and machine learning is still very interesting. You have the DevOps lifecycle, and no one's done a really good job of integrating data and machine learning into that. And that's super tough, but we're keeping our eye on that. And as soon as there's great kind of solutions that spring up, we won't hesitate to bring that into GitLab as well.
Okay, nice. Another question from Lorenz is, what is your fondest memory of the University of Twente?
Many of them. It was kind of cool to have a campus university. I remember the breakfast we had in our first year. It's also, I did applied physics. They had the BACO had in the basement. They had their own social scene, which was interesting. And I'm grateful for like your student days are where you have a lot of time on your hands. And I thought I was wasting that by reading too much tech news, but it turned out okay in hindsight. So I'm grateful for that. But also at our dentist, I met some people and we're still friends and still hanging out every year. Same for the BACO. So 2 Christmas dinners every year with people from studies. I think that's super grateful for that.
Cool, nice. But next time you're in Twente, don't forget to step in our incubators to look around. You're welcome. From Daniel again. That was Daniel. Carol is asking, how to sustain yourself while running a startup that require constant reinvestment of revenue?
Yeah, in our case, we raised outside money. We raised over $300 million to be able to make those investments.
Okay. Final questions, I think, because questions are coming in. From Rainer Harms again. International company culture. Do cultural differences matter, or do you witness our global homogeneous techie culture? Must be an A. Yeah.
Yeah, cultures certainly do matter. People are different. I think techie culture can be dangerous because it's very easy to fall into kind of a bro culture, which is male and non-inclusive. So I think you want to make a conscious effort to be inclusive and diverse, attract kind of different people to the startup from the beginning. The earlier you do that, the easier it is, and to make sure that people of all with all kind of attributes feel welcome.
Nice. Okay. Another question about from incubators. Which companies or entrepreneurs do you admire, or where do you find your inspiration?
Yeah, it's there's no people who are only good or only bad, but I must admit I'm very inspired by what SpaceX is doing. They're treating building rockets like writing software, where you just have a new one every couple of weeks. I think right now we're on to serial number 11 in Boca Chica, and it's just that's insane. And I love how kind of relatively simple the solutions are that they have chosen. So I admire the iteration and the simple solutions they came up with, like just building a rocket body of just unspooling some steel and then welding it together is crazy compared to what people were doing before. So props to that.
Yeah, right. I genuinely did. From Martin, Martin is asking, with the company having grown to 1,300 people already, how much of your time are you still spending on recruiting personnel?
Oh, a lot of my time.
Yeah.
And so my responsibility would be board members and executives, and I spend a ton of my time on that. And then also we made some big changes to our recruiting process. It used to be inbound, so we had over 15,000 people a month apply to work at GitLab, but it didn't let us change kind of the composition of the company. We wanted to become a more diverse company. So we switched to a model where we proactively reach out to people we think could add to the quality of the people at our company, but also our diversity. So that's been a point of attention. And it's like people make the process and the process makes the product and all the rest. So recruiting the best people is super important.
Nice, nice. Before you mentioned your Silicon Valley company, if I look to the big tech companies, they are started in your area or still there, the real big companies. There are also a lot of big tech companies in Asia, China and others. In Europe, we don't see them so much. What are we doing wrong?
A couple of things probably. One of the most important things is like the market. Like we just make less money in Europe than in the US, which is really sad because in Europe we have an even higher kind of usage of GitLab. So I think the market is just tougher. Companies move slower. If we look in the US, digital transformation is much more of a priority than it is in Europe. Companies are under less pressure from shareholders to deliver value, which makes them move slower. There's less accountability. The other thing maybe is it's not as attractive to invest in startups. In the US, you have capital gains, which kind of half the tax bill that you would have in Europe or even less. So there's less money available for startups.
Lots of reasons to work on.
Lots of reasons for sure.
Okay, thanks. A final question here from the audience.
I think this is a unique opportunity to ask what's the life of a millionaire looking like?
Oh, you get up in the morning. I call with my brother this morning. I was on a treadmill just walking, and then had a Soylent. And here I am, a bit under caffeinated, doing this talk. And then for the rest, like I'm fortunate to live in the Bay Area, so I love water. My parents bought a sailboat before they bought a house, so I went sailing on Saturday with kind of an acquaintance, and you talk a lot about business. So it's very typical Silicon Valley. Like you're kind of friends, but also you have a lot of business interests in common. Like he's on the board of a big public company, and you talk about that. You talk about ideas and what people are doing. And on Sunday we went surfing. My best friend here surfs, and my wife and I are trying to learn stand-up paddleboarding. So we got up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday, which is rough, but we were in the water 7:30 at Pacifica, and we mostly did all kinds of chores. My wife is studying for an Alta MBA, and then at night we went out dining somewhere outdoor, and we walked there to get some exercise. As you'll learn in California, old people are a bit exercise crazy, so you gotta keep up with that.
Very nice to hear that also, the personal insight. It was exciting talking to you, Sid. Thank you very much. And I give the microphone back to Tim for your final words.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Also, thank you, Sid. Thank you very much. It was really interesting to me, I guess to the rest of the audience as well. What really stood out to me was when you said, when people say they miss the office, they don't miss the furniture or the physical place. they miss like the informal meetings. That was one of the things that really stood out to me. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me. And we're the most public company in the world, so I hope you Google GitLab Handbook and start reading in case you're curious for more.